Your name, of course, needs to be clear. Please don't be clever. Don't be cute. Don't try to make it something that's just a fun play on words. Your name should solve a problem for your listener that your podcast addresses whenever possible.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
What's up, podcaster? It's your host, Adam A. Adams. Today, I'm joined with Courtney Elmer, and we're going to get into some psychology stuff. She's a cancer survivor. She's a business owner. She's a podcast host. And something that she can focus on, and she has focused on, and she's good at, is figuring out how to get you to push play. How do we get you to push play? Or how do we get your listener to push play? So it's the psychology prior to even having that person push that button to say, yeah, let's join this podcast. Let's hear what this person has to say compared to let's hear what this other one has to say. So a lot of that has to do with psychology. And so we're going to get into that. First and foremost, Courtney, will you tell us a little bit about, I know your podcast has been up for several years now. You've been going strong. It looks like every single week without ever skipping a beat or skipping a week. What have you learned? Just before we get into the psychology, what did you do wrong in that long journey of years of having a podcast?
What didn't I do wrong? So much of it. No, it's learning as you go. And truly, that is the beautiful thing about podcasting. It's one of my favorite things is that it's such a flexible medium that allows you to evolve with it, with the industry, with your business. And so looking back at my journey, we launched our show coincidentally 2 weeks before everything shut down for the pandemic. And podcasting kind of blew up that year. We were on the front end of that. And when I launched my show, one of the biggest mistakes, I didn't know what I didn't know, right? And I named my show after my company. My company's name is The EffortLESS Life. Well, The EffortLESS Life means a lot to me. And if I were to sit here and share with you what that means and the ethos behind it and the philosophy behind it, you'd go, oh yeah, that sounds awesome. I like that. But to the average person who's scrolling through the podcast apps, particularly in the business space, and they see that podcast, they're almost looking out of place. Effortless life, what's this about? Is this about going to become a Buddhist monk on the side of a mountain? I don't know how this applies to me, right? So we've since evolved the name of the podcast. But that was one of the first things that I realized is that I set that up and it didn't serve me. I didn't know differently, but it was one of those things I looked back and go, oh, okay, I should have put a little more thought into that.
So out of curiosity, like I've got a listener right now who's about to launch a podcast and they probably were already thinking about naming it after their company. I'm like getting into their head with their psychology right now. And I think they're like, yeah, I'll just call it Name My Business. It's catchy. It works. It means a lot. It has ethos and other random words. It's got all these things. So what would you say to them?
First and foremost, you got to do a deep dive on who your listener is. And when I say deep dive, I don't mean just like tell me who they are, what age they are, what they do for a living. I mean, get to know what are the problems that are keeping them up at night. This gets into the psychology piece. What are they laying at night awake, staring at the ceiling, worrying about? What are their deepest fears? What are their biggest desires? What's the transformation that they want that you can help them achieve with your expertise that you're hoping to help them achieve on your podcast? What is it that they want and what's keeping them from getting it? What are the beliefs they have about themselves that are keeping them stuck, holding them back from being able to achieve that transformation? And there's some other things we look at too when we create what I call a psychographic profile for a listener. You need to have this because your entire show should be built around this, your name especially. Because what's one of the first things someone's going to look at when they're scrolling through a category or typing in a search term? They're going to see the cover art and they're going to see the show name. And if you fail to grab them with the name, they're going to skip your show in favor of others. They'll never even get to the amazing content. They'll never see your description. They'll never see your episode titles. And so your cover art, your show name, and a few other things, I call these the content gatekeepers. And so with your name, if you're listening right now and you're like, yeah, I'm about to launch a podcast. Hold on a second. I'm leaning in a whole lot right now because I want to hear what you have to say about this. Your name, of course, needs to be clear. Please don't be clever. Don't be cute. Don't try to make it something that's just a fun play on words. Effortless life. Yeah. Okay, great. It's all about working less, right? And maximizing your time, creating leverage. But to the average person looking at that, that's not clear to them. So your name has to be clear. Your name should solve a problem for your listener that your podcast addresses whenever possible. And I'll give you an example. We had someone that we worked with who came to us and they were struggling to grow their podcast. And like, look, I've been doing this thing for 2 years. I know that this is the medium that I want to be on. I enjoy it. I like podcasting, but I want to be getting more out of it. I'm tired of just looking at these numbers and seeing 30 downloads, 50 downloads. And the name of the show was Move Forward Anyway. Now, when you got an understanding of who this host was and the work that they do in the world, what this person does is they help professionals take the leap of faith to go after a big dream, whether that's leaving the corporate world and starting a business, maybe writing a book, or some other venture. So when you got that, then it's like, okay, the name makes sense. Move Forward Anyway. It's about moving through your fear and taking this leap and creating an action plan and going after that dream. But to the average person who's scrolling that, they don't know who the host is. They don't know what that show is about. They don't know what the host stands for. So why should they care? So he was losing listeners because the name wasn't grabbing them. So we got into his listener psychology. And we're like, all right, look, what is the biggest fear that your listener is dealing with? And for his particular listener, the biggest thing blocking them from going after that dream was right here, the 6 inches between their ears. There's self-doubt. So he renamed his podcast to Stop Doubting Your Dream. And that's a name that better addresses the pain point that his listener is experiencing. Because if someone's scrolling through self-improvement and they're looking through that category and they have a dream that they haven't been able to take action and they see that, it's likely going to give them pause and maybe create enough intrigue to get them to click. And that's the first step. That's where we have to start. Before we can even hit record and deliver all this amazing content, we got to be able to capture their attention.
I've got a few questions.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I'm going to start with positive psychology and negative psychology because I'm more of an advocate for negative psychology. And I've had a lot of people on the show, and I've even had a couple of clients who are like, I will never do that manipulative negative psychology shit. And I just want to ask you, because this did change from positive to negative. It went from move forward anyway, positive, to stop doubting your dream, to the negative. Now, stop doubting, in some people could say that's positive, but you have to hit the negative. It's like the vitamin, here's a vitamin, it'll make you feel great. And you're like, hey, I already feel okay. And the last time I took a vitamin, I didn't feel that different. Or here's a Tylenol, you've got a headache, this will make it go away. You're more likely to take the Tylenol when you need it than you will the vitamin. And so I'm curious, since I'm an advocate for the negative psychology, and this, we're talking a lot about psychology today, is that part of it? Or did I just notice that move forward anyway versus stop doubting your dream? Is that something that you focus on?
Yeah, it's definitely part of it. And to your point about positive and negative, I think both have their place. And we have done tons of testing ourselves, our clients, and in looking at what titles perform the best, what show names perform the best, what descriptions perform the best, and seeing how that has an impact on overall listens. And one of the things we've noticed time and again, specifically with episode titles, is the problem-focused titles outperform the transformation or benefit-focused titles. So when we categorize it, we look at problem-focused is the top performer. Problem-focused with a benefit performs second. And then purely benefit-focused, how to increase engagement with your audience, for example. That performs, it's kind of our third performer. Looking at it from a psychology perspective, as humans, we are hardwired to avoid pain. What you said about the Tylenol is so spot on. We don't want to have that headache. We don't want to be in pain. So a lot of times we'll go to great lengths to stop pain. But we won't go to as great of lengths to achieve some desire. We might want the desire, but we won't go as far to get it. And I look at some of the great podcasters out there, Andrew Huberman, who's like top one of all podcasts of all time, right? Everyone loves this guy. When Andrew Huberman is doing an episode on sleep, he's not sitting there telling you, hey, you need to get 8 hours of sleep at night because this is what's going to happen when you do. We all know we need to have more sleep, right? It should be better quality. You got to sleep in the dark room and the cool lights and turn the lights down, cool temperature, all that. What Andrew's actually doing, if you listen to how he delivers his information, He's actually addressing a very real problem that his listeners have. Because right now, chances are they're listening to that episode because they're not getting enough sleep at night. And that's creating problems in their life that they want to solve. So what he's doing is he's addressing a positive outcome, right? You get more sleep, you're going to be able to feel this way, do this thing, have more energy, be more focused, be more productive. But that's actually, he's positioning it in a way that solves the problems that his listener has. It's very subtle, but a lot of people miss this. And to your point, a lot of people think that, oh, that's just marketing tactics. That's bro marketing. I'm going to just hit the pain so hard and like whack you over your head with your own problems. And that's not what I'm advocating. But what I am advocating is playing into the way that our brains are already wired. Your listener is looking through podcasts likely to solve a problem. They're not listening to a marketing podcast to learn how to market better because they are already great at marketing.
I agree. That's a funny way to say it. Okay, let me ask a couple questions, and I want to get more into the psychology as well. I want to talk about the avatar for a second, because as we started and we talked about the things that you would have done differently, the things that you did wrong, you didn't really think about the avatar or the psychographic data on the avatar. What they're worried about is one of the things, what kept them up at night, what are their deepest fears, so that you can understand that person. My first question about the avatar is, how many avatars should one show host have? How many perfect listener profiles should one podcast host have?
That's a great question. I will say this was also a mistake in the beginning that I made, or rather didn't do, right? I didn't create a psychographic profile. My podcast, when I started it, quite honestly, it was more self-serving than anything. I wanted the deeper connection. I wanted my thoughts to be heard. I wanted to make a difference with my voice, right? It was very self-serving. And I wouldn't say, oh, I did this in this ego way, but at the same time, that was the driver. But as I've learned, and fortunately have shifted my beliefs there, is that no, it's not about you at all. You might be hosting it, but it is not about you. It is about your listener. So the easiest way to answer that question is it depends. And I know that's an answer we don't like to hear as business owners or as podcasters, but I think part of it, you're going to have to look at what is the topic. I have a client right now who has 2 avatars. He is a personal trainer for high school athletes whose parents have to pay for the training. So he is in a unique situation where he actually has to do an in-depth profile and analysis on both of those avatars, both the parent and the student, because he's got to sell the student on the training and he's got to sell the parent on paying for it. That's rare. That's not typical. In most cases, an in-depth look at a single avatar will serve you very well, because for most of us, we're positioning a podcast, as business owners at least, at the top of the funnel. So we want to cast a bit of a wide net. That said, this is a different niching process than age, background, demographic. Where in the world do you live? This is about niching through psychology and getting to understand how your listener thinks, what motivates them to action, what gets them to click play or to click through and download that resource that you're telling them, or to book a call with you, or whatever your call to action is in your episode, right? So we have to have an intimate understanding of that. Particularly if you're a business owner, it will mirror your ideal client, because if you're using your podcast as a marketing tool, we obviously want to make sure we're attracting the right people who could become those potential clients for you.
I like that. Got so many questions that I think would be fun to dive in with you. But staying on the avatar, this to me has always been a real person. It's been someone that I had worked with. And when I work with clients that are starting a podcast, I generally ask them to think of somebody that they've worked with. I'm curious if you think of it the same way, or if you create an avatar that's like an imagination, that's like, ooh, if they lived here, if they did this, if they worried about this. For me, it's just my favorite client that I've ever worked with. I'm just going to make them my avatar. Now, if I want to call it a different person, if I want to say Josh instead of James, I can, just to not embarrass James. But it's always been an actual real person. And I think that helps me to figure out the psychographics a little bit better. But curious, what are your thoughts? Is your avatar for the listener, when they're coming up with their avatar for their podcast or for their company, is that a real human being, or do they make them up?
I think it's helpful to start with a real human being, Because there's going to be those instances where you've worked with clients and they are like, gosh, if every client could be like this person, I would just have the best business in the world. I'd be the happiest person on earth, right? And if you have someone like that, absolutely, by all means, base it off of them. If you don't have someone like that, well, then where do you start, right? It becomes a little more, not confusing, but a little trickier to say, okay, well, who is this person? And am I just pulling this out of thin air? Does this person even exist, right? And what I would say is start with someone who fits the bill as best as possible, right? Maybe it's not your most perfect person, but it's your most coachable person. Or pick a quality or characteristic that you really like about that person. They show up, they pay on time, they're coachable, they do what you tell them to do, right? Start with those characteristics. And then you can further build out that profile to create someone who is truly ideal for you if you don't already have someone like that starting out. One of the reasons this is important, and Adam, one of the reasons I like starting with a real person and using their name in your mind is because when you sit down to record, you can pull their picture up and you can start your episode and say, hey, James, today we're going to be talking about, and you go on with your episode, right? And what that does is that it attunes your brain to your listener and it changes the way your voice sounds. Might sound crazy, but there's a whole thing there with the psychology of the voice. And this is a big one because a lot of people tell me, I don't like the sound of my voice. I don't like listening to myself, right? And I get it. I don't sit there and listen to my own podcast episodes either, but it will help you connect with your listener. This is an audio medium. They're not necessarily watching the live stream of this on YouTube, right? Or the repurposed content that you posted somewhere. They're listening. And so they've got to be able to connect with you. So by basing your avatar on a real person, you're already connected with that person. So it gives you a leg up. It's an invisible element. No one's ever going to know this. This is not something that anyone's going to see, right? Like they would see your cover art. They're not going to see this, but they'll hear it. And when you can really focus your topics to that person, it does help because it makes it more tangible because you're sitting in a room recording by yourself. You're not really talking to anyone. You're recording by yourself. And like, am I just talking to the walls here? But it can help ground you and actually deliver your topic in a way that, yeah, you would coach your client on exactly the same way. And that'll make a difference for you.
So should we be thinking of an audience when we are recording? 100 people or 1,000 people or however many people listen to our show. Let's just say it's 3,500 per episode. Should we be thinking of the 3,500 people and us standing on a stage delivering to them? Or should we think of whoever that avatar is and just having like a one-on-one conversation with a person? What do you think?
I'll tell you what I do. I just speak to one person. That's going to come out in your voice as well. And actually, I don't limit that school of thought to my podcast. I do that if I'm delivering a live webinar. I do that if I'm speaking from stage. I gear it all towards one person and then deliver it in a way that I would just tell that person. I would talk to them. I was literally last week filming a series of upgraded videos for one of our programs. Before I hit record, I would think in my mind, which of my clients is this for? Right? We have a few people who are ideal. And I would get one person's name in my mind. And I would say, all right, Christina, so today we're going to dive into this, right? And exactly what I mentioned before you hit record, but it's not just limited to your podcast. So I like doing it for one person because again, I feel like it is one of those invisible elements, but it helps you create a deeper connection because in your mind, when you get on stage to present something to people, right? It's like we put on this jacket that we're like, I don't really know if this fits me, right? We put on this persona that isn't really you. Yeah. And at the end of the day, a podcast is such a powerful tool, as you know, and as those listening know, to create trust. That's the goal. But if people can't connect with you, they won't trust you.
Love it. Last-ish question before we get into more of the psychology of getting someone to push play. You talk a lot about step one being the avatar, understanding the psychographics, what they're worried about, what keeps them up at night. And then step two is being able to start to serve them and find the niche and find out what you do to serve them and the intro, the outro, the name of your podcast artwork. Something that I am curious about, in your opinion, is wondering if the listener ought to be considering getting their photograph on their artwork or like not on their artwork. Because some people say, I want this to be about the listener, not me. And so why would I put my face on? You and I both have ours on our artwork. So I want to understand, like, What should a new podcaster be considering, whether or not they'll have their artwork with their actual headshot on there?
This is a great question. I think for most podcasters, it's going to depend on the type of podcast that you're creating. And I don't mean, is it a guest show? Is it a solo show? Is it a hybrid? What I mean is, what purpose is your podcast serving for you? Is it thought leadership? Is it audience building? Is it content creation? Is it to raise awareness? Is it to create community? Is it to generate revenue? Maybe it ticks a couple of those boxes, but what's the greater purpose? And then answer that question in light of what greater purpose your podcast serves. For me, and maybe for you, Adam, I don't know if this is true for you, but for me, my podcast is a tool for connection. And my intention behind it is to build trust with my community. Yes, that in turn can help me generate revenue. Yes, that can help me be seen as a thought leader. But my deeper purpose really is twofold. The external one is connection. The internal one is to be able to use my voice to create a greater impact. So I have my picture on there because I want my listeners to feel connected to me. But for someone else who's podcasting, maybe that's not the goal. And maybe the goal is to build awareness around a certain topic. And maybe it doesn't make sense to have your photo on there because it's not really about you. It's about the awareness that you're building around this topic. Does that make sense?
Almost. And I'm going to have a follow-up question that might make it a little bit more clear. I'm trying to read between the lines, and correct me if I'm wrong. If there is going to be an expectation or a desire to have the listener connect with you, to know, like, trust you, to hire you, to work with you, then the picture's more important. And if the main purpose is just the information, getting it out there with no expectation of working one-on-one with the listener, then it's less important? Or am I mixing that up?
I would agree with that.
Okay.
I would agree with that assessment. Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's get into the psychology, but first a quick word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back. Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, GrowYourShow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that, like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show. We're with Courtney Elmer, and we've talked a lot about gatekeepers, keeping the content clear versus clever. For your title, your name should solve a problem, but we want to get more into the psychology. How do we get that person to click play? And that's why we got Courtney Elmer. Courtney, take it away. How do we do that? Because I think we all need to know.
I know. How can we get more listens to our show, right? That is the question every podcaster asks. And you mentioned the gatekeepers, and I want to circle back to this because we touched on a couple of them. Your cover art, your show name, but there's a few more. And what I want you to think about is I want you to think about your own user habits. If you're someone who consumes podcasts and you're looking for a new podcast to listen to, what's the first thing you do? Probably either type in a keyword or go to a specific category of interest. And then you start browsing the shows in that category. So there we are with our phone. We're scrolling, right? We're looking. And the first thing that's going to grab our attention is the cover image. The next thing that'll grab our attention is the name. As I mentioned before, if those two things are compelling enough, then maybe we'll click through. And the next thing you're going to read is the description. After that, if that's intriguing enough, you'll probably scroll down and see some of the latest episodes and the topics that they talked about. You'll be looking at the titles. Then you click, you see the show notes, the summary of that episode. And then and only then, if you have made it through all 5 of those content gatekeepers, and if all of them are unconsciously communicating to you along the way that this is an episode that you need to listen to, you'll hit the play button.
Okay, so there's 5 gatekeepers.
5 gatekeepers.
Cover art, the name of the podcast, the description, the titles, and then the show notes or summary, right?
Yes. Yep.
All right, keep going.
Yes. So most hosts who quit, and the latest statistic is they quit after episode 6, right? That breaks my heart because most of them quit and conclude that, well, people didn't like the sound of their voice, or maybe their message wasn't as valuable as they thought it was, or maybe they're not enough of an expert. yet. And they make it mean something about them that it doesn't actually mean. Because 9 times out of 10, I'm willing to bet their content was just fine. The topic they're talking about, a very real topic that people probably have an interest in, not something super obscure. But what they probably didn't do was communicate to their listener why they should care about that topic. Because again, if we're looking at our own user habits, and let's just use Instagram as an example. How many of us scroll Instagram late at night, right? We're just double tapping stuff. Oh, that's funny. Haha. Double tap, right? Scroll past. That doesn't interest me. Scroll past. That doesn't. Oh, double tap. And we're moving through content pretty quickly. We're consuming it quickly. But have you ever stopped to think about what actually makes you engage with a piece of content? Was it the image? Was it the title that you saw? Was it the first little snippet of the caption that you read? Was it social proof because 100,000 other people liked this particular video? And so we can apply that to our podcast and say, okay, if these are the 5 content gatekeepers and someone essentially has to enter through all of these gates before they can get to my content, how can I, at each point in the journey, communicate to my listener why they should care about what I have to say? We first have to sell our listener on what this is going to provide for them, what kind of value this is going to provide, before they will engage with our content and click play.
Where do we put that? Like in these gatekeepers, cover art, name, description, title, and show notes. Where do we find the best time to communicate with the listener? Why should they care to listen?
Mm-hmm. You can do it through your words, and you can do it through the message behind your words. So here's what I mean by that. Just like the example I gave you with the cover art and the name earlier, with move forward anyway, and switching that to stop doubting your dream, which makes that clearer and more focused on the problem. That is actually an unconscious piece of communication, because nowhere did you say, hey, this is a great podcast about achieving your dream and I can really help you do this. And we're going to solve the problem of self-doubt, other than in those 4 words in your title. But it's enough to, on an unconscious level, make your listeners stop the scroll, because it is a real problem that they're dealing with. That's one example. Let's look at cover art. If you look at Amy Porterfield's podcast, and if I were to pull her up on my computer right now and take a screenshot of all the other art that's next to hers, hers is the only one that is completely opposite of the other shows that are appearing next to her, top 10 or so shows surrounding her. Most of the shows there have warm colors, really bold graphics, really strong text, right? Some of them have photos, some of them don't. But it's these bold fonts. It comes across strong as these warm colors, which color theory says they're supposed to incite people to action. But Amy did the opposite. Now, Amy's show is called Online Marketing Made Easy. Title's very clear, and it solves a problem for her listener. It's more positive framed, but it's actually solving a problem because she's attracting people who are struggling with their online marketing. Her cover art is very light gray. It's clean. The shirt that she's wearing is like a light blue color, and it's completely opposite everything else that you see next to her. I'd be willing to bet that's intentional. Because if you're scrolling and everything looks the same, where's your eye going to be drawn to? To the one thing that looks different.
Yeah.
Right. So those are 2 examples of how we can unconsciously grab someone's attention, right? They're not sitting there going, let me look at a show that has different cover art, right? This isn't a logical thing that they're sitting there, examining, how I'm going to listen. But it will draw their eye. Then they'll read the title that will address a problem. Then they read your description. And if that is framed towards further validating why you're the person to help them solve those problems, then that will help to build some of that trust. And then they'll say, okay, this person seems to know what they're talking about. Let me see what they're actually talking about. And then that's the next piece, is your episode titles, which, as I mentioned earlier, we've noticed that the ones that are focused on solving problems tend to get the most listens.
Yeah. So you put 3 things, and I basically had 2. I said positive psychology, negative psychology. And you had problem-focused title, problem-focused with some benefit, and then benefit-focused title. And the problem-focused title was, when split testing these next to each other, it performed best. And then problem with benefit worked, but not as well. And then the benefit-focused title was the last type of title to get people to click on it. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So how would let's title this episode today. Let's title this episode. Let's start at the bottom. What would be the benefit-focused title for what we've talked about on this episode?
Really simple off the top of my head, how to get more listeners to your podcast.
How about the problem with benefit? What would we title this if we went step 2?
So step 2, so a problem that we're solving is the problem of having not enough engagement, right? Or not as many listeners as you want. We got to look at first, what is this specific problem that people are having that's causing them to listen to this episode? So what would you say?
Learn how to title your episodes to get the most listener base. Something like that. Would that be a good problem with benefit?
That could work. My brain immediately jumps to the problem one.
Okay.
So if we were to title this episode positively, it would be how to get more listeners, right? That's very simple, straightforward. If it were more of the negative focus, it could be 3 surprising mistakes you're making that are costing you listeners or that are causing listeners to scroll past your podcast. So the way my brain works, I use positive, negative, and then I kind of do a hybrid where it could be something in the middle, like how to get listeners to click your show and stop scrolling past, right? Something to that effect.
Yeah.
Obviously, polish it up a little bit.
I'm hoping my editor grabbed the best one that you said so we can get people to download this episode.
Yes, go listen,
it's good
right?
value.
How to get people to stop scrolling past your show. Like, oh, tell me how to do that, right? Because it solves a real problem for people.
Speaking of solving a problem, in your podcast and in your business, what problem do you solve for your listener or for your client? I'm curious for a couple of reasons. A, because I think maybe the listener could work with you, but B, because I'm hoping that we'll find that you're doing a pretty good job at almost serving the right person and solving a very similar concern for that same person so that it's connected. Because I think that's a good way to do a podcast. So for both reasons, what problem do you solve in your business? What problem do you solve on your podcast?
Yes. So I'll start with the podcast first, because that's actually the top of our funnel. And for me, my podcast is a tool for connection and also thought leadership expansion. And one of the things that I'm passionate about looking at in the entrepreneurial space is not how do we succeed, but how do we fail better? Because so often in entrepreneurship, we resist failure. We know it's inevitable, but we don't want it to happen, whether it's the little stuff, the big stuff. And so we resist it. It's a blow to our ego. But what I am fascinated by is this field of psychology, which talks about how we can actually leverage adversity to our advantage to create greater income, to create a greater impact, to take those lessons from those failures and apply them quickly, systematically, and effectively to bring about growth. So that's what our podcast focuses on. It serves a wide audience of 6-7-figure entrepreneurs who are in the process of scaling their businesses to that next level in revenue. And how can we help them better navigate failure so that it doesn't become a sticking point or a speed bump on their journey? Taking that down to the work that we do with clients, we've done a lot of work with people on the system side within their business, helping them install better systems for scalability. And so many of our clients are coming to us saying, Courtney, I am sick and tired of posting 6, 7, 8, 10 times, 12 times a week on social media, trying to come up with content that I pour my heart and soul into, and it gets buried in the news feed in 24 hours. And then I have to do it all over again. And I'm just burnt out on it. I'm getting nowhere. And I've switched platforms. I've jumped from Instagram. Then I was doing LinkedIn. Then I tried YouTube and none of it's working, right? What do I need to do to better market my business? And so concurrently, we had launched our podcast and seen huge success with this, both as a marketing tool, a lead generation tool, a thought leadership expansion tool, a networking tool. And so we started teaching people how to install a podcast as a marketing system within their business. And it serves that same person by solving a very real problem for them, which is how can I get my message in front of a wider audience, but do it in a way that is aligned with me, who I am, my energetic capacity. So I'm not out there hustling 12 hours a day for leads on Instagram, trying to connect with people and get my name out there and make a name for myself. Because so many of the people that we work with have a deeper purpose and a very important, powerful message that they want to share. So we really take them from this unheard expert to giving them the systems and structure they need to succeed with a podcast so they can set themselves up to be seen as that in-demand thought leader in their niche.
Awesome. Love it. And speaking of failures and learning from failure, are there any others that you could share before we jump off today? Like maybe one or two?
Which one? You want me to talk about my $23,000 mistake?
Done.
Okay, do it. That was a podcast episode title back around episode, 60 or 70. There was a time in my business where, like most of us starting out, we get into business and we think, I got this. And then we realize there's so much that we don't know. And we don't know what we don't know. So we start investing in courses and coaches and mentors and masterminds and all of these things. And I was in a season of investing in my business. And I had just put $23,000 into this program with someone, was in this program for a year. And I'm not commenting on the program itself. I'm not saying it was good, bad, or anything else. But when I exited the program, I realized I didn't actually need that program. And I was upset with myself because I was like, I could have done this on my own. It didn't really teach me anything, a little bit, but it didn't teach me as much as I expected to learn in the program for what I had invested into it, time, money, and otherwise. And as I reflected on this experience, because it just rubbed me the wrong way for a while, and I was upset, and I was like, and here it is. Now I'm not even in this program anymore. I don't even have access to the content to go back to if I wanted to. You'd have to renew and re-up and all this stuff. And I was like, what is the lesson here, Courtney? Why? Why did this experience happen for you? And for me, it was an experience to learn how to better trust myself and to learn how to better trust that, you know what? I love having mentors. I love having coaches who can teach me something that I don't know. And at the same time, I also know a lot and I can trust that. And I can make decisions in my business without needing permission from someone else to do this or that or the other thing. And so at that season in my journey, that was the lesson from that. But it cost me $23,000 to learn.
And did you almost re-up just to watch a replay of something?
No, because I was so upset. I was like, I'm not spending $23,000 more dollars.
I have like a quick rapid fire round for you. It's just 3 little questions. And first is, what length of episode should we be targeting as podcasters?
This goes back to your ideal listener. When are they listening? Are they listening at the gym? They're doing an hour-long workout. Are they listening on their commute? They've got 20 minutes. Are they a busy parent who's on a walk with the dog or the kid? You're right. They've got 10, 15 minutes. Gear it towards your ideal listener.
I love it. Good answer. How many episodes per week should we focus on?
Focus on what you can consistently deliver. For me right now at this season in my journey as a business owner, as a podcaster, it's 1 a week. Never missed a week in 3 years. I'd love to be releasing 3, 4, 5 episodes a week. But I also know that I wouldn't be able to keep up with that consistently. So start with what you can stick with.
And last question. You have good answers. I love this. Should we do solo episodes, co-hosted episodes, or interview episodes? And if not, what's a good combination? If a combo, what's a good combo?
Yeah, I'll speak personally on this one. I think it's really important for your listeners to feel connected to you, even if your show is not about you. Because at the end of the day, you are the host of that show. So there has to be some kind of connection and trust as their guide, as you're guiding them, that they need to build with you, developing that relationship with you. So solo episodes can help you accomplish this. Doesn't mean you have to have a purely solo podcast. I don't. But I do believe a hybrid is a great answer. It's a great solution. It allows me to interview guests that I can bring in to talk about topics that I don't have an expertise on, but that will serve my listeners well. And it allows me to share my expertise on the topics that I do know about to stay connected with my listeners. So that's what works for me.
And you do 1 in 3 or?
Yeah, usually we do about 2 guest episodes, 1 solo, couple guests, 1 solo. Every once in a while, I'll have like a 2-part solo that goes out. We keep it flexible. Okay. I'm not rigid with it where it's like, oh, cool. Today, this week's a solo episode. It's like, no, we got a great guest this week. Let's plug them in here. I'll just catch up with the solo episode next week.
Awesome. Courtney, AntiFragile Entrepreneurship is in the show notes. The link to your website is in the show notes. And any social media that you wanted the listener to connect with you on, that's already in the show notes. So if you're listening, that's how you can find Courtney Elmer. Just scroll down, click on any of those links, follow her, go to her website, go to her podcast, leave her an honest rating and review on the show. And I want to just thank you, Courtney, for jumping on, helping us with some psychology. My favorite part that sticks out is clear, not clever. Now, I've had so many clients that become so clever with their titles, and I've never understood how to explain to them in good words that we want this to sing to the person, but clear, not clever. I'm going to use that. I love it. I really appreciate you.
On that note, can I leave your listeners with a little gift?
Do it.
We call it the binge-worthy episode title cheat sheet. And what it is it is a Mad Lib style plug and play template with over 100 episode title templates that have these psychological principles baked in. So essentially, when you're going to title your episode, you just pull up this sheet, you plug your topic in to one of these title templates, and it will help you spit out either a problem-focused title, a solution-focused title, or one that's a hybrid.
Awesome.
And can save you a lot of time. So I'm happy to give that link to you as well. We can link that in the show notes too for your listeners.
Done and done. Thank you, Courtney, and have a tremendous rest of the day. I appreciate you coming on. I learned a ton of interesting stuff. The 5 gatekeepers was really, really cool. The way that you word things is different from the way I've worded a lot of things on the podcast. So I think the listeners come away with a lot of value. We'll talk to you guys soon. See you guys on the next episode. By the way, one way to ensure that you don't miss out on great content that we're producing on a regular basis is to make sure you're subscribed to the show. You need to be subscribed or following the Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to it in order not to miss all of that. And before I let you go, I need to mention, because a lot of people are asking, do you help? Can you help me with this? And the answer is yes. My company actually does it. It's called Grow Your Show. And you can find that at growyourshow.com. Our clients, they call us the easy button for podcaster because they simply have to record their episode. And they know that every single thing else is done for them. We sweat the hard stuff so you can be the star of your show. And if you would like help to make sure that we're editing and publishing and promoting and doing your social media, it's all in one place. And I think it's pretty affordable. You'll have to take a look for yourself. Just go to growyourshow.com and check us out. And by the way, I'll see you on the next episode.